The Vexthari had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their leader, HFY the Eternal, had commanded empires and bent entire civilizations to his will. He had never known defeat. He had never known pain. He had never known what it meant to be mortal. And now, lying in the Imperial Chamber high above the capital world of Vexstar Prime, HFY felt something he had not felt in millennia. He felt himself breaking. His crystalline body, once perfectly whole and gleaming with golden light, now showed cracks. Deep fissures ran through his form like rivers of darkness. The healers had tried everything. The greatest medical minds in the galaxy had gathered in this chamber. They had used every technology available. Nothing worked. The Eternal One was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Marcus watched the news feeds from a small room on Space Station 12, orbiting a dead planet that nobody cared about anymore. The feed showed the same images over and over. HFY lying still. The Imperial Palace locked down. The Galactic Council meeting in emergency session. The old human operative sat alone in the darkness. His face was weathered and scarred. His eyes were cold and calculating. He had taken 37 jobs in his career. He had completed 37 jobs. His success rate was perfect because he never accepted work unless he knew he could finish it. This job was different. This job seemed impossible. 3 days ago, a representative from the Alliance of Oppressed Species had contacted him. They offered him more credits than he had earned in his entire life. They wanted him to kill HFY the Eternal. They wanted him to do it before a new leader could take control of the Vexthari Empire. Marcus had laughed at them. Then he had listened. Then he had said yes. The door to his safe house opened. A figure entered, cloaked and careful. It was Sarah, his contact from the Alliance. She was a Metherian, a species known for their honesty and their hatred of tyranny. The Vexthari had enslaved her people for 800 years. She wanted vengeance, and she was willing to pay for it. Sarah removed her hood and looked at Marcus with her large, dark eyes. She did not waste time on greetings. HFY will be dead in 7 days, she said. His body is failing. The regeneration matrix that kept him alive all these centuries is finally breaking down. It is a natural death, not assassination. Then why do you need me? Marcus asked. Because the succession will happen within hours of his death, Sarah replied. One of his 12 children will take the throne. Possibly the eldest, Vextal. Possibly the youngest, who is more merciful. We do not know. But whoever sits on the throne will be just as powerful as HFY was. Just as ruthless. The cycle will continue for another 1,000 years. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Outside, stars burned in the void. Somewhere out there, an empire was crumbling. Somewhere out there, trillions of beings lived in slavery and fear. You want me to kill one of them, Marcus said. Whoever takes the throne. No, Sarah said. We want you to kill him before he takes the throne. We want you to kill HFY before his body fails completely. We want you to kill him while his children are still fighting over the succession. In the chaos, a new order might emerge. The enslaved species might have a chance to rebel. The Galactic Council might find the courage to act. Marcus turned back to face her. He had heard many reasons for killing, targets over his long life. Greed, revenge, politics, love, fear. But this was different. This was hope. It cannot be done, he said. HFY is protected by shields that nothing can penetrate. His guards are the best warriors in the galaxy. His palace is the most fortified structure ever built. Every assassin that has ever tried to reach him has failed. I know, Sarah said. That is why the Alliance came to you. You are human. You think differently than other species think. You solve problems in ways that seem impossible to everyone else. Marcus considered this. It was true that humans had a reputation in the galaxy. They were considered unpredictable, creative, dangerous in ways that could not be calculated or predicted. Humans broke the rules. Humans found solutions that made no logical sense, but worked anyway. The Vexthari had never really understood humans. They had come to Earth 500 years ago expecting to find animals. Instead, they found a species that could think like predators, adapt like survivors, and never give up no matter how impossible the odds. The Vexthari had recruited humans as workers and soldiers, but they had never truly respected them. That was their mistake. "I will need 3 things," Marcus said. "First, I will need access to the Imperial Palace blueprints. I will need to know every corridor, every duct, every weak point. Second, I will need a team of 6 humans, specialists, people who can think fast and move faster. Third, I will need 5 days after the death of Keshver before any new leader is crowned." "The Galactic Council can give you the blueprints," Sarah said. "They have spies everywhere. The humans you need, we can provide. But the 5 days. The succession law requires that a new leader be chosen within 72 hours of the death of the previous leader." Marcus nodded slowly. He was already thinking, already planning, already seeing the problem in ways that others could not see it. "Then I need to move faster," he said. "I need to strike when his children are too confused to organize. I need to strike when the Empire is most vulnerable. I need to strike while they are still believing he will recover." Sarah stood quietly. She knew that this old human would find a way. The Alliance had chosen correctly. Marcus had spent his whole life finding ways to do the impossible. "When do you want to leave?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow morning," Marcus replied. "I want to see the palace myself. I want to feel the place. I want to understand the Vexthari, not just as targets, but as people with weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses. The Vexthari are no different. They are just very good at hiding theirs." Sarah handed him a small data chip. It contained everything the Alliance had gathered about the Imperial Palace, Keshver's schedule, and his guards. "The others will meet you at the transport station," she said. "They know what you will ask of them. They have already said yes." When Sarah left, Marcus sat alone in the darkness again. He thought about the billions of beings living under Vexthari rule. He thought about the children who would never know freedom. He thought about the chance, however small, that one human could change the course of history. He did not sleep that night. He studied the blueprints until he knew every room, every door, every possible route. He was old, but his mind was still sharp. His hands were still steady. His will to survive was still unbroken. Tomorrow, he would go to the capital. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And in 5 days, when Keshver the Eternal was finally dead, the galaxy would discover that it had been wrong about one thing. Humans were not just soldiers or workers. Humans were the apex predators, and Marcus was about to prove it. The Imperial Palace was bigger on the inside than Marcus had imagined. The blueprints had shown him the layout, but they could not capture the scale of the place. Corridors stretched for hundreds of meters. Ceilings rose so high that they seemed to touch the sky. The walls were made of pure crystal that hummed with energy. Marcus had been working as a maintenance technician for 2 days. His job was to move through the lower levels, checking the ancient systems that kept the palace running. The Vexthari had built this structure 10,000 years ago. Even an immortal civilization needed maintenance. Sometimes no one questioned him. The workers around him, both human and alien, moved through their assigned tasks like machines. They did not talk. They did not question. They just worked and tried not to be noticed. The shift supervisor was a Vexthari named Kelmer. He was an older warrior, one of Keshver's generation, though not as powerful. He spent most of his time in the administrative offices, reviewing reports and making sure the palace systems functioned properly. He had glanced at Marcus once when he arrived, and then never looked at him again. To Kelmer, Marcus was invisible. This was the blindness that Marcus had been counting on. On the third day, Marcus found what he was looking for. Deep beneath the palace, in a section marked only with a symbol that meant living systems, was the regeneration chamber. The door to the chamber was sealed by a lock that required a biometric scan. Marcus could not open it directly, but he could do something else. He had been studying the palace blueprints in his memory, tracing the connections between systems. The regeneration chamber was powered by an energy conduit that ran through the maintenance level. The conduit was shielded, but not beyond the capabilities of someone who knew what to look for. Marcus found the access panel. It was hidden behind a false wall in a sealed storage room. He had to pick the lock using tools that Patricia had hidden in his maintenance kit. Inside the panel was a network of energy channels that fed power to the upper levels. He took a photograph of the layout with his concealed camera. That night, he transmitted the image to Carlos at the safe house. By the next morning, Carlos had sent back a detailed schematic. There was a way to disrupt the power flow to the regeneration chamber without breaking the shield. It would require precision. It would require perfect timing. It would require Marcus to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. But it could be done. Patricia had finished building the device. It was smaller than Marcus had expected, no bigger than a meditation sphere. When activated, it would emit a specific frequency that would interfere with the regeneration matrix. It would not destroy Kashfur immediately. It would simply stop his body from healing itself. In his weakened state, the Eternal One would die within hours. The problem was getting the device into the regeneration chamber. Marcus studied the problem like a puzzle. He walked through the palace during his shifts, watching the guards. They followed patterns. They were alert, but they had developed routines. The Vextari were naturally long-lived. They did not hurry. They did not expect trouble. This was another blindness. This was another weakness. On the evening of the fifth day, Kashfur's condition worsened. The news feeds announced that the Eternal One was now unconscious. The healers had given up. The Succession Council was preparing to crown a new leader. They had less than 24 hours remaining. Marcus received the signal through a hidden communication device in his uniform. Patricia had finished all her preparations. Carlos had hacked into the palace security system. David had the transport ship ready for immediate takeoff. Kevin was standing by in the lower city, ready to provide backup if something went wrong. They were ready. Marcus worked his final shift with complete calm. He moved through the corridors in his maintenance uniform, carrying his tools. No one looked at him. He was part of the palace now, as invisible as the stone itself. At midnight, he made his move. He went to the sealed storage room where he had found the power conduit. He opened the access panel using Carlos's codes. The security system did not alert because Carlos had placed the palace into a maintenance mode. For exactly 30 seconds, the outer sections of the palace would show no alerts. For exactly 30 seconds, one corridor would be UNWATCHED. Marcus worked with the precision of someone who had practiced this moment 1,000 times in his mind. He attached Patricia's device to the main power conduit. The device began to pulse with a faint light, sending out its disruptive frequency toward the regeneration chamber above. The frequency could pass through walls and shielding because it was not a physical attack. It was not a weapon. It was simply a signal, a vibration at a specific frequency that would prevent the regeneration matrix from functioning. He sealed the panel. He closed the storage room. He was back in the corridor within 90 seconds. No alarms sounded. No guards came. The palace continued operating as if nothing had happened. Marcus returned to his barracks and lay down on his bunk. Around him, other human workers slept. Above him, somewhere in the highest chambers of the palace, Keshver the Eternal was beginning to understand that something was wrong. The regeneration matrix was failing. But unlike the slow death his body had been experiencing, this failure was immediate. This failure was total. The immortal being who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years was now truly mortal, and he did not know why. By dawn, alarms were shrieking through the palace. Keshver had called for his healers. They could not find the cause of the disruption. The regeneration matrix simply was not functioning. No weapon had been used. No shield had been broken. Something was interfering with his body at a fundamental level, but they could not determine what. Marcus moved to the lower exit, still wearing his maintenance uniform. No one stopped him. The guards were too busy responding to the emergency in the upper levels. The palace security was focused on a threat it could not define or locate. By the time he reached the lower city, the news was spreading. Keshver was dying. The Eternal One was finally mortal. The end of an era was approaching. Marcus walked through the streets with hundreds of other citizens, all of them staring up at the palace that was now in chaos. He walked toward the transport terminal where David was waiting. Behind him, in a chamber high above the city, the most powerful being in the galaxy was finally experiencing what everyone else had always known: the experience of being human, the experience of having limits, the experience of knowing that death was coming and there was nothing that could be done to stop it, and he would never know that a single human being had been the instrument of his destruction. Marcus climbed into the transport ship. David released the docking clamps. The ship lifted away from the surface and accelerated toward the stars. The plan had worked. The impossible had been made possible. The galaxy was about to change. The safe house on Vextar Prime was hidden beneath a warehouse in the lower districts. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The air smelled like metal and old stone. Somewhere above, the city was alive with news about Keshver. Down here, there was only silence. 5 people waited for him in the briefing room. They were all human. They were all dangerous. David was a former military pilot with scars on his face and hands that never healed properly. He had flown combat missions for the human fleet before leaving to work private jobs. He could pilot anything and fight anything that tried to stop him. Linda was a medic and biologist. She was smaller than the others, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had spent years studying alien physiology. The Alliance had brought her because they knew that no physical attack would kill Keshver. They needed knowledge. They needed understanding. They needed someone who could find the cracks in his armor. Carlos was a hacker. He had spent his entire life breaking into systems that were supposedly unbreakable. He had stolen from corporations and governments. The Vextari had a warrant for his arrest on 7 different worlds. He had a smile that never reached his eyes. Patricia was an explosives expert. She had worked in mining colonies, demolishing mountains and building structures out of stone. She could blow up anything, which meant she could probably blow open anything that was locked. Kevin was a stealth operative like Marcus, but younger. He was faster and stronger, but he had not yet learned patience. Marcus would have to teach him, or Marcus would have to watch him die. They all stood when Marcus entered. They knew his reputation. They knew what he had done in the past. They had come to this hidden room because they wanted to do something that mattered. Marcus placed the blueprints on the table. Holographic images flickered to life, showing the layout of the Imperial Palace in perfect detail. The building was massive, a structure that rose from the surface of Vextar Prime like a mountain carved from living crystal. Keshver is on the top level, Marcus said, pointing to the highest part of the palace. He has been there for 3 weeks. His personal chambers are protected by 3 layers of shields. The outermost shield is military grade. designed to stop weapons and explosives. The middle shield is medical, designed to keep his body stable. The innermost shield is personal, a layer of energy that surrounds him constantly, tied directly to his biological signature. So we cannot reach him with weapons, Patricia said. It was not a question. Correct, Marcus replied. 12 species have tried over the centuries. All of them failed. The Vextari military has repelled every attack. The shields have never been broken. Linda was already studying the medical data on Keshvar's physiology. Her fingers moved across the holodisplay, pulling up information about Vextari biology. Marcus watched her work. She was doing what he had done all night. She was looking for weakness. There, Linda said, pointing at a diagram of Keshvar's internal structure. This crystalline matrix. It is what keeps him alive. It is the source of his regeneration. Without it, he would have died thousands of years ago. The Vextari have known about this for millennia, David said. They guard it carefully. Yes, Linda said. But they guard it like it is invulnerable. They do not protect it against every possibility, because they cannot conceive of anyone being able to threaten it. The regeneration matrix is fed by a biological process. It is alive in a way. It requires energy to function. Marcus leaned forward. This was the moment. This was what he needed to hear. What happens if the energy is cut off? He asked. Linda looked at him. Her eyes were cold and clear. He will die. Slowly at first. Then faster as his body realizes it cannot regenerate. In his weakened state, it might take hours. Maybe less. His body is failing anyway. The disruption to the regeneration matrix will accelerate the process. He will die before he understands what is happening. How do we reach this matrix? Carlos asked. It is inside his body. We cannot cut him open. The shields would protect against that. No, Linda said. But the shields are designed to protect against external threats. They are not designed to protect against internal disruption. If we can introduce something into his environment that interferes with the regeneration matrix, something subtle that the shields would not recognize as a threat, then we might have a chance. Marcus was already thinking 3 moves ahead. He could see the shape of the plan forming like a crystal in his mind. We do not attack the palace, he said. We have already established that direct assault will fail. Instead, we attack from within. Someone gets inside the palace before the siege happens. Someone becomes part of the system. Someone waits for the right moment. Kevin spoke for the first time. His voice was young and eager. You go in as a maintenance worker. You work inside the palace for days or weeks. You learn the schedule. You understand the security. Then, when the time is right, you make your move. Marcus nodded. The Vextari have never valued human workers enough to watch them carefully. We are beneath their notice. We are tools to them, nothing more. That blindness is their weakness. Patricia was calculating already. I can prepare a device. Something small. Something that can be hidden in a maintenance compartment. Something that disrupts the regeneration matrix frequency. How small? Marcus asked. The size of my hand, Patricia said. I will need 5 days to build it properly. The specifications are complex. One mistake, and it will not work. Marcus looked at each of them. 5 humans in a room beneath a Vextari city, planning to kill the most powerful being in the galaxy. It should have been impossible. It should have been suicide. But there was something in their eyes. Something that the Vextari had never understood about humans. They did not believe in impossible. They believed in finding another way. We have 5 days before Keshvar dies naturally, Marcus said. The plan is simple. Patricia builds the device. David prepares the transport ship for emergency evacuation. Carlos researches the palace security codes and finds a way to disable the outer entrance for exactly 30 seconds. Kevin will train as my backup. Linda will monitor Keshver's condition and tell us when his body is most vulnerable. And you? Linda asked. I go inside, Marcus said. I go inside as Daniel Torres, a Vexthari maintenance worker. I find the regeneration chamber. I plant the device. I wait for the signal. And then I leave. Just like that? Kevin said. His voice was doubtful. Marcus turned to face him. Yes, just like that. Because the Vexthari expect military tactics. They expect explosions and weapons and glory. They do not expect patience. They do not expect subtlety. They do not expect a single human to walk into the heart of their empire and change history with his hands. Carlos grinned. It was the expression of someone who understood that they were going to attempt something insane. I like this plan, he said. It will probably fail, but it is a good failure. Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. They were right. It would probably fail, but they were going to try anyway. And sometimes, trying was enough. The next morning, Marcus went to the labor office and registered as Daniel Torres, a maintenance specialist. The Vexthari did not even look at him carefully. To them, he was invisible. He was just another human worker among millions. By evening, he was inside the Imperial Palace. By morning, the real work would begin. Keshver had lived for 123,000 years. In all that time, he had known only one constant. He had known that he was eternal. He had known that his body would heal from any injury. He had known that death was a concept that applied to lesser beings, not to him. Now, as his crystalline form cracked and fractured from the inside, he finally understood what all other life learned from birth. He finally understood that everything dies. Everything ends. Nothing lasts forever. The healer standing before him was trembling with fear. The creature was from a species called the Metherian, a being that lived for only a few hundred years. They had brought this healer because he was the greatest medical mind in that species, which meant he was considered exceptional among lesser beings. But even this healer had no answer for what was happening to Keshvar. The regeneration matrix is failing, the healer said, his voice shaking. But I cannot determine why. There is no physical damage. There is no biological attack. The frequency that is interfering with your body is unlike anything I have ever encountered. Keshvar did not respond. Speech was becoming difficult. Pain was something he had not felt in thousands of years, but he felt it now. Every crack in his crystalline form was like a wound that would not heal. Every moment brought more fragmentation, more collapse, more dissolution. The Imperial Guard commander stood to one side, watching the Eternal One with eyes that could not hide the truth. Keshvar was dying. The most powerful being in the galaxy was failing, and there was nothing the Guard commander could do to stop it. Somewhere in the palace, a threat remained. A threat so subtle that the greatest military minds in the Vexthari Empire could not locate it. A threat so effective that it had accomplished what 1,000,000 warriors could not accomplish. Keshvar understood, finally, what his failure meant. His empire was built on the assumption that he was eternal. His children had known their entire lives that they lived in the shadow of an immortal father. The Vexthari military had been trained to protect an eternal leader. The structure of the government, the laws, the traditions, all of them were based on the existence of Keshvar the Eternal. But Keshvar was no longer eternal, and the Empire would not survive his death. Across the galaxy, the Vexthari loyal to the Empire felt the shift. They felt the moment when their ruler began to fail. Some began to plan for succession. Some began to consider rebellion. Some simply accepted that 10,000 years of dominance was ending. In the medical observation rooms, Keshvar's 12 children were gathering. They had all received the news. The Eternal One was dying. Within hours, or perhaps minutes, one of them would become the new ruler. But unlike their father, they would be mortal. They would be vulnerable. They would have to rule from a position of weakness, not eternal strength. Vextal, the oldest child, was already calculating how to maintain power. He was already planning which species to enslave and which to destroy. He was already assuming that the Vextari dominance would continue under his rule. But Vextal did not understand what his rule. But Vextal did not under his rule. But Vextal did not understand what his rule. But Vextal did not understand what his rule. But Histal, father, was learning in his final moments. As darkness crept across his consciousness, as the cracks spread through his body, as Keshver felt the approach of true death, something shifted in his awareness. For the first time in more than 100,000 years, the Eternal One experienced something he had never experienced before. Clarity. All his life, Keshver had been ruled by his power, his ability to destroy, to command, to reshape the galaxy according to his will. He had never questioned this power. He had never considered that it might be wrong to use it. Power was simply what he was. It defined his existence. But now, with death approaching, Keshver understood something important. He understood that the species he had conquered, the beings he had enslaved, the civilizations he had destroyed, they had all been struggling, not because they were weak, but because they were alive. They were grasping, fighting, adapting. They were doing what every living thing does. They were trying to survive, and he had never given them credit for this. He had seen their resistance as weakness. He had seen their refusal to accept his dominance as foolishness. He had never understood that they were showing him something he had never needed to show. He had never needed to fight for survival because he was eternal. But someone in the galaxy had learned to fight differently. Someone had learned to observe and understand before attacking. Someone had found a way to kill an immortal being without weapons, without violence, without any of the traditional tools of conquest. Someone had used intelligence, patience, creativity, evolution. Keshver understood now. He understood who had defeated him. With his last moment of clarity, as his body approached final dissolution, Keshver activated his personal communication system. The device was wired directly to his neural center. It required no movement, no speech. It required only thought. He sent a message. A single message that would be transmitted across the galaxy, from one end of known space to the other. A message that every species would receive. A message that his children would hear. A message that the Galactic Council would study. A message that would change the course of history. The message was short. It said only, humanity is the apex predator. You have all underestimated them. Their weakness is their strength. Their limitation is their power. In defeating me, they have shown what evolution truly means. Survival through adaptation. Survival through intelligence. Survival through the refusal to accept any limit. Let them reshape the galaxy. They will do it better than I did. After sending the message, Keshver felt his body reach critical failure. The crystalline structure that had housed his consciousness for more than 100,000 years shattered, fragment by fragment. The light that had glowed within him for millennia faded into darkness. The Eternal One was dead. The alarm systems in the palace fell silent. The medical equipment ceased its futile attempts to stabilize him. The guards stood in silence, watching their emperor become nothing but scattered crystal on a royal platform. In the moment after his death, something strange happened. Instead of the palace descending into chaos, it descended into stillness. Every being in the building paused, as if they were all hearing the truth that Keshver had proclaimed. Humanity was the apex predator. In a transport ship racing away from Vexstar Prime, Marcus received the message. He listened as Keshvar's final words were transmitted across the galaxy. He listened as the Eternal One acknowledged his defeat. He listened as the being who had ruled for 100,000 years admitted that a human had beaten him. David was piloting the ship with steady hands. Carlos was monitoring the space lanes for pursuit. Patricia and Kevin were reviewing the success of their plan. Linda was reading the medical data from the palace, understanding what had happened to Keshvar in his final moments. But none of them spoke. They all understood what was happening. They all understood that the moment they had created was bigger than any of them. They had not just killed a being. They had changed the course of history. And somewhere in the galaxy, billions of enslaved beings were hearing the message. They were understanding that the being who had ruled them forever was dead. They were feeling the first stirrings of hope. The galaxy had just become a different place, and one human had made it happen. Marcus sat alone in a rented apartment on the human colony world of New Haven. The colony was not impressive. It was a small outpost on the edge of Vexthuri space, a place that the Empire had always considered too insignificant to bother with. But now, in the days following Keshvar's death, it had become one of the most important places in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the Eternal One had fallen. 6 months since his final message had been transmitted across the stars. 6 months since the galaxy had begun to change. Marcus watched the news feeds, tracking the developments that had unfolded since he and his team had fled Vextar Prime. After Keshvar's death, his 12 children had fought for control of the Empire. The battle had lasted 3 weeks. Blood had been shed. Entire ships had been destroyed. In the end, Vextal, the eldest child, had claimed the throne. But Vextal was not the Eternal One. Vextal was mortal, and everyone knew it. He would live for perhaps another 5,000 years, but he would eventually die. The idea of eternal dominance was gone. The age of the immortal emperor was over, and in the power vacuum, change was coming. The Metherian had rebelled first. They had risen up against their Vexthari oppressors and declared their independence. The Vexthari military had moved to suppress the rebellion, but the Metherian fought with a ferocity that shocked the Empire. They were fighting for freedom, not conquest. They were fighting because they had finally seen proof that the Vexthari could be defeated. Other species had followed. The Krell had declared independence. The Sylth had refused to pay their tribute to the Empire. The Guardian Coalition had closed their borders to Vexthari ships. Dozens of enslaved species had seen Keshvar's death and decided that they would no longer accept servitude. The Galactic Council had finally found its courage. With the Vexthari military stretched thin trying to suppress multiple rebellions, the Council had begun to establish new laws. Laws that protected the rights of all species. Laws that established mutual defense agreements among the former enslaved peoples. Laws that redefined the balance of power in known space. And throughout all of this, the attention of the galaxy had turned to humanity. The news feeds carried stories about Marcus and his team. Some of the details were correct. Some were exaggerated. Some were pure fiction. But the core truth remained the same. A single human had walked into the most fortified structure in the galaxy and had defeated the most powerful being in existence. Not through weapons or strength, but through intelligence and creativity. Humanity had proven something that no other species had been able to prove. Humanity had shown that the Vexthari were not truly invincible. More importantly, humanity had shown that there were other ways to win besides brute force. The news feeds also carried reports of the message that Sarah had received from the Galactic Council. The Council wanted to meet with human representatives. They wanted to establish formal relations with humanity. They wanted humanity to sit as an equal among the other species. For the first time in recorded history, humans were being treated as something other than workers or soldiers. For the first time, humans were being seen as thinkers, as strategists, as beings who could reshape the galaxy. Marcus did not want the attention. He never had. He had taken the job because someone needed to do it, and because he had believed it could be done. He had not taken the job to become famous or to change the course of history. But history had changed anyway. A message chime sounded in his apartment. Marcus checked the communication system. The sender was identified as a Vexthari ambassador named Velkosh. The subject line said only, "Request for meeting." Marcus hesitated. He had assumed that the Vexthari would want to hunt him down and kill him. They would want revenge for the death of their emperor. They would want vengeance for the destruction of their 1,000-year empire. But perhaps they had also heard Keshvar's final message. Perhaps they understood what the Eternal One had learned in his final moments. Marcus opened the message. The content was brief and formal. Marcus of Earth, I am Velkosh, an ambassador of the Vexthari people. I am writing to request a meeting between yourself and a group of younger Vexthari who wish to discuss the future of our civilization. We have heard the final words of Keshvar. We have considered his wisdom. We believe that there is a path forward that does not require conquest or dominance. We wish to speak with you about this path. We ask only that you consider our request. Marcus read the message 3 times. He was trained to recognize deception and manipulation. He knew how to identify traps. But this message seemed different. This message seemed honest. He responded with a single word, yes. 2 days later, Velkosh arrived on New Haven. The Vexthari ambassador was smaller than Marcus had expected. The being had a crystalline body like all Vexthari, but it was not as imposing as he would have imagined. Velkosh moved with careful deliberation, as if afraid that sudden movement might cause offense. They met in a neutral location, a private chamber in the colony administration building. No weapons, no guards, just 2 beings from different species, meeting to talk about the future. I am honored to speak with you, Velkosh said. His voice was soft and musical, very different from the harsh tones that Marcus had imagined Vexthari would use. What do you want? Marcus asked directly. He had never been one for unnecessary politeness. I want to tell you something that Keshvar learned, Velkosh said. Something that our entire civilization needs to learn. For 10,000 years, we believed that strength meant the ability to destroy. We believed that power meant the ability to force our will on others. But Keshvar understood, before he died, that there is another kind of strength. The strength to adapt. The strength to survive in the face of impossible odds. The strength to create solutions that no one else could imagine. Marcus said nothing. He listened. Your species has that strength, Velkosh continued. Humans have not ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. You have not built great empires or subjugated billions of beings. But you have survived. You have created. You have refused to accept the limits that others placed on you. That is a form of power that we have never truly understood. And now, some of us wish to learn. What do the others want? Marcus asked. What does Vexta want? Vexta still believes in the old ways, Velkosh admitted. He wants to maintain control through force. He wants to suppress the rebellions and restore the empire to what it once was. But many of us believe this is impossible. We believe that the age of the Eternal One is truly over. We believe that the future belongs to those who can adapt and change, not to those who cling to old power. Marcus considered this. He considered the Vexthari race, fighting among themselves about what to do in a galaxy that no longer belonged to them. He considered the species that had been enslaved for so long, now learning what it meant to be free. He considered the vast scope of change that he had helped to create. There will be conflict, Marcus said. Vextal will not simply accept the loss of power. There will be war. Yes, Velkosh agreed. But it will be a different kind of war. It will be a war between the old way and the new way. And I believe that the new way will prevail. Because the new way understands something that the old way does not. The new way understands that strength does not require dominance. Power does not require control. Survival does not require the destruction of others. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, the colony sprawled in the distance. Humans were working there, building, creating, surviving. The species that the Vexthari had once considered beneath notice was now reshaping the galaxy. I will help, Marcus said finally. But I will not do it as a leader or a representative. I will do it as an advisor. I will help your people learn what we have always known, that the greatest power comes from refusing to accept defeat. Velkosh made a gesture that Marcus interpreted as respect. That is all we ask. Over the following months, Marcus worked with Velkosh and the younger Vexthari to establish new relationships between their species and the liberated peoples of the galaxy. It was difficult work. There were setbacks and failures. There were moments when violence erupted between old enemies. But slowly, something new began to emerge. The Galactic Council expanded to include not just the Vexthari, but representatives from every major species. Laws were established that protected the rights of all beings, regardless of their origin or power. Trade routes were opened that allowed peaceful commerce instead of coerced tribute. Educational systems were created where species could learn from each other, and humanity was recognized as the species that had started the revolution. The species that had shown the galaxy that there was another way. 3 years after Keshvar's death, Marcus received an official invitation to attend the founding ceremony of the new Galactic Alliance. It was a gathering of every major species in known space. They were gathering to acknowledge the end of the Vexthari Empire and the beginning of a new era. Marcus almost refused. He did not want the glory. He did not want the recognition. He wanted only to know that the work was done and that the galaxy had changed. But David convinced him. David, who had flown the escape ship with perfect precision. David, who had become one of humanity's first diplomatic liaisons to the freed species. You have to go, David said.